Okay, welcome back. This is part two. So where we left off is we took a look and we simulated 1 year, right? So we simulated the 1 year. Now we got to look at replicating this calculation n times, okay? And what's the average yearly profit? Okay, so to replicate this calculation n times, let's approximate. Let's do this 200 times. So let's build a data table like we did before. So if you looked at question 14, we built a data table. So let me just move this over. Okay, so what we want to do is we can just call this data table. All right, so data table, and then we can just do the runs. So we just call this run. And over here we have the sort of yearly profit. All right, and we're going to replicate that 200 times. All right, so let's do run 1, run 2. Okay, so now that we've done that, Excel can figure it out, right? So we can just take this, there we go, and just stretch that down 200 times. There we go. And we want to feed it the yearly profits. So we would take this number here as our, to feed it. And in terms of data table, we must highlight, and again, let's take this and we'll see if we can draw our attention to it. Let's see if we can do some borders. All right, just to draw our attention, and maybe we'll go for a thick outside border. Okay, so what we want to do is, again, we would highlight the number of runs and the sort of the first feed, which is the yearly profit there. But notice that I don't take the headings, right? So we don't take the headings for that, because if we did, it won't work. Okay. All right, so we highlighted that. All right, now we want to open up a data table. All right, so where do we find that? Well, we go into data, go into what if analysis, and then we go into data table. Okay, now we're filling in for the column. And again, the input cell, we just take something that we know is blank, right? AA1, nothing special about it, you just need that. Okay, and then filled that in, and you can see in terms of where it came from. Okay, now take a look here. These are yearly profits. So essentially, it would be like if she did this for 200 years, right? So, but we did it in a couple of minutes. Now let's see, get ourselves a nice outside borders to draw attention to it. And again, as you remember, this should be in green because it's output. There we go. And we'll just pop that into green. All right, and we're going to take this sort of based on one replication, and we're just going to copy this, and we're going to base it on 200 replications. So we'll just take this and just say based on 200 replications. All right, and then this would be the average of all those. So we would take the average. All right, and then we would grab this column here. There we go. So what's the average of all those, right? And then we would close that off. All right, and the yearly profit, it looks like it's about 4,600. And remember, this is an average of 200 observations of yearly profit. So it shouldn't vary that much, because any sort of extreme, whether extremely small or extremely large, is going to get drowned out by the other yearly profits, right? So if there's a few that are extremely high, they're going to get washed away. If there's a few that are extremely low, it's going to get washed away because we're looking at the average. So I'm just on an empty cell right now. If I press delete, you'll see that and take a look, it doesn't veer that much from 4,600. But this is yearly profit, and it's not based on an average of 200 yearly profits. And you'll see that this number here, this number should vary a lot more, right? So right now it's 4,356 and 4,800, 4,975, 475, and you can see that it's got a little bit more variability in it. All right, so it's going a little bit higher, it's going a little bit lower. Now, the next part of the question, let's take a look, and I guess I can just move this over a bit so it's more, there we go. So Chelsea is thinking, okay, I'm ordering 100, but is that an optimal amount to order? Like, should I order, 50, 100, 150, 175? What's the optimal amount? So what we would do is we would take a look and change this order amount and see how it affects yearly profit. This is the one to look at because this is it's going to be the most consistent because it's replicating as if we did this sort of 200 years, because that's what it's looking at. We're looking at this as 200 runs, and what is each run? Each run is simulated profit for 1 year. So what we want to do, and again, we've already got it for 100, so your question's asking for 100, but maybe we'll put this in as sort of 125 and see if that's better than 100. All right, so what we want to do is go into data, right up here, what if analysis, and we want to go into scenario manager. Okay, so let's add in a scenario. Okay, scenario cell, and the changing cell that we're going to change is going to be this cell here, which in this case is J11. So let's take this to J11, and the scenario name, they want us to try 50, so let's try that. Let's see if we order 50 at a time. All right, so again, we go to the supplier and say, hey, instead of ordering 100 at a time, we're going to order 50 at a time. And we press OK to that. So that's the name of the scenario. And the value for the changing cell, we would switch that over to 50. So input 50 for that one. Press OK. Let's do another one. I know it's asking for 50, 100, but once we got it all set up, it's pretty fast to do. So 75. All right, the changing cell is still J11, which is good, so that doesn't change. And I'm going to pop in 75. All right, so going to the supplier and saying, instead of 100, give me 75 at a time. All right, and then we've already got one for 100, and we can do one, let's do 125, right, because that was one of the demands. Let's do OK for that, and let's put this in as 125. Press OK for that. And add in the last two, which is ordering 150 at a time and ordering 175. Okay, so we'll call this one 150. All right, and putting in 150 into the changing cell. And lastly, we'll add in 175. So 175. Press OK for that. And 175. Okay, so we got all of our scenarios. So in terms of a summary, we want to have a scenario summary, which is great, and then the result cell. Result cell should be J20, which is the yearly profit. So we're trying to optimize based on the yearly profit. So based on how much we order from the supplier, which one's the best one to order from on average? On average. So we press OK for that, and then it'll produce it. So here's the summary. So if you look in terms of ordering 100, on average, you're going to make 4,644. 50, quite low, just over 26, or looks like 2,600 exactly. 75, a bit better, 3767. 125, 474, 4,743, just over that. And then 3,900, and then 2,000. So it seems to reach a peak not too far from 100. So it seems to be a smidge more, okay, on average. Because remember, and again, the profit drops because, as you know, if we're bringing in 150, it's not always 150 is demand. Same thing for 175. That means you're buying a lot and you're having to send a lot back. So it looks like, and then if we're ordering not enough, then we're not taking advantage of we're sending a lot of people home without their celebrity magazines. So even though it's not one of them there, it looks like 125 is slightly more in terms of profits. Okay, so it's nice to have that whole scenario summary for you. Now you could, if you're interested, you could, let's say, pop in 120 instead of 125. What about 120? All right, so 479, 4,729, and you can sort of fiddle around with that. And it looks like it's 4,000, not too far off from 4,700, which isn't too far from 125 for that one there. Okay, or you could do, let's say, 130 instead of 125, right? Is that a bit more? All right, you can press that, do a few, and you'll notice that it's sort of peaked, right? So 130 isn't going to give you more than, say, 125. 120 as well as 130 isn't going to give you more, dramatically more, in terms of profit. So it looks like the yearly profit, and I'll get it back to 100. Looks like it's the best at 125 on average. And again, your answer will differ. I mean, your answer is if you do this will be in the ballpark, right? So it's going to be in the ballpark, but they won't be exactly the same because this is based on a simulation. And that's one of the things that you'll notice when you check your answers at the back of the chapter. You'll notice that it'll talk about that the answers aren't going to be exactly the same, but it's going to be within this certain ballpark. Okay, so that's what we're looking at for question 18. And just to sort of summarize, we did the profits for 52 weeks. And one of the things we notice is that revenue is based on demand because we're only bringing in 100 of the magazines. So you'll see that whenever demand is above, whenever it's 100 or above, your revenue is 300, right? So whenever demand is 100 or above, and when it's below, you've got to send some back. So 75, that means you sold 75, but you had to send 25 back. 50, you sold 50, but you had to send 50 back because you brought in 100. So again, we had to, in terms of revenue, we had to do the if function, which is to compare this number here in the B column to the order amount. And if it was either larger or at the order amount, that means you sold everything that you brought in. If not, then it's going to be some number smaller than that, which would be 75 times 3. But then you'd have to return those 25, and then you'd have the unsold reimbursement. All right. And again, you can see that the cost doesn't change because we're bringing in the same amount each time. But remember, when we change this, okay, like if I punch in 125, notice what happens to my costs, right? So again, I may make more revenue sometimes. As you can see here, I can make more revenues sometimes. Okay, but at the same time, be aware that my costs go up. Okay, and again, costs don't change because we're bringing in the same amount, but notice that we're referring to these cells such that if I change my order amount, let's say I bring in 125 instead of 100, order it from the supplier, and you'll notice that my costs will go up with that. Okay, so we ran that simulation, and then using data table to run that simulation 200 times, right? That's the sort of efficient thing to do, as opposed to replicating this whole thing 200 times, which would be richer in information, but it would take up a lot more space. Okay, and we looked at that, and then the real essence of simulation is, yeah, we're bringing in 100, but on average, if we brought in 50 magazines to sell, or I put in 125 magazines to sell, or 150 or 175, how does that compare to 100? How does that, is bringing in 100 the optimal amount? And it looks like, 100 is pretty close to optimal, but it looks like 125 does slightly better. Okay, so that's what I'm looking at in question 18. Thank you.